We often complacently think that weapons of mass destruction or explosions that wipe out entire cities in the blink of an eye are an exclusive invention of the modern era, don't we? Dead wrong. Look at this clay tablet, CBS 2204. Scholars call it a lamentation, a name that sounds truly poetic and sentimental. But if you strip away that academic label, what you are seeing looks more like an autopsy report. It doesn't speak of a gradual decline. It describes a violent death. Cities incinerated by a firestorm, land poisoned by salt to the point of plant extinction, and horrific temperatures that melted even brick and stone. And this isn't just a fairy tale on paper. At el-Hammam, located just east of the Dead Sea, archaeologists found something that shouldn't exist in the Bronze Age. Pottery shards and building bricks melted into glass, twisted like plastic meeting fire, with bubbles boiled up to the surface. To do this, you need temperatures above 2,000 degrees Celsius. Let me repeat, 2,000 degrees Celsius, in an era when humanity's highest technology was just a pottery kiln. What the hell happened here 3,600 years ago? A meteor exploding in midair as scientific hypotheses are debating. The wrath of God descending upon Sodom and Gomorrah as the Bible describes? Or, as Sumerian texts imply, a purge by the Anunnaki gods using weapons that came from the sky? Today, put your history textbooks aside, because we are going to find the answer in shattered fragments of bone. Welcome, you daring souls, to dark history. Welcome back to the darkness. I am Zorro. Do you believe in curses, or are you the type who believes in cold, hard science? Tonight, I want to invite you to a place that is incredibly boring for normal people, but is a crime scene for the curious like me. Imagine you are standing at the University of Pennsylvania Museum. Amidst thousands of inanimate artifacts, there is one thing that makes scholars shudder whenever they look at it. A tiny chipped clay tablet. Catalog number CBS 2204. It lies there, silent in the Babylon gallery. At a glance, it's just a dried lump of baked earth dug up from the temple library at Nippur, Iraq. But look closer at those dense cuneiform markings on that surface. That isn't romantic poetry. That isn't a receipt for selling barley. That is an obituary, an autopsy report of a civilization. Archaeologists call it the Sumerian Lament, written around 2000 BC. The name sounds artistic, right? They say these are verses weeping for the fall of cities. But let me read to you what is actually recorded. And please, put that secular literature mindset aside. This text describes a destruction incomprehensible for that era. It doesn't speak of slow decay. There is no story of economic downturn or corrupt kings causing a dynasty to collapse. Number, it describes obliteration, instant, brutal, and clinical. The ancient scribes trembled as they carved these lines. Cities swallowed by storm and fire. Temperatures so terrible that mud bricks melted. Pottery turned to glass. And the land? Salt covered everything, turning fertile fields into dead zones for centuries. Do you see the anomaly? Ordinary fire does not melt mud brick into liquid. A campfire does not turn a clay pot into glass. To do that, you need the temperature of a reactor, or the epicenter of an explosion. And what is the most haunting refrain throughout the text? The cause of the destruction. They don't blame enemy armies. They call it a decree of the gods, executed by weapons from above. Samuel Noah Kramer, a great expert, pieced together over 20 fragments so we could see the full picture. A genre of literature dedicated solely to mourning cities that were completely vaporized. For decades, academia, our dear friends with the thick glasses, waved it off. Oh, Zorro, that's just allegory. Ancient poets loved to exaggerate. Losing a war is embarrassing, so they said the gods punished them to save face. They treated it as a fairy tale, a religious fable to lecture humans. But what if they were wrong? What if that clay tablet isn't poetry, but a battlefield report? To find the answer, we must leave this air-conditioned museum. We must go to a place where the heat burns the skin, where secrets are buried under the scorching sands of the Jordan Valley. Close your eyes, my traveling companion. You don't need to strain your eyes at the screen. I know you might be lying in bed drifting into sleep after a long, tiring day. That's fine. Let my voice lead the way. Where in the world are you right now? What hour marks your drift into slumber? Wherever you are, imagine we are standing at the edge of an excavation site northeast of the Dead Sea. The temperature is 35 degrees Celsius, 95 degrees Fahrenheit. The air is thick with the smell of dust and the smell of ancient death. Here, beneath this soil, archaeologists have just touched something that will tear apart the safety curtain of mainstream history, something that proves the fear on that clay tablet was real. Welcome back to the kiln. We are at el-Hammam. 3,600 years ago, this was not this dusty wasteland. It was a metropolis, a New York of the Bronze Age in the Levant. It was massive, 10 times the size of Jerusalem at the time, with city walls so thick they could support 4-story buildings and a palace complex that would make Egyptian pharaohs jealous. For 15 years, Dr. Stephen Collins and his team have been peeling back history here like peeling a giant onion, layer after layer of civilization. And then, they hit something that no history textbook prepared them for. They call it the destruction layer. Imagine a sandwich, but instead of meat, you have a layer of charcoal, ash, and debris 1.5 meters thick. But that's not the crazy part. Look at what I'm holding in my hand. This used to be a pottery jar. Now, it looks like a failed piece of abstract art. Its surface is bubbled, melted, and warped. It has turned into glass. And not just pottery. Mud bricks, the most basic construction material of the ancient world, didn't break. They melted. The clay used for roofing flowed down like lava. My friend, we have a major thermodynamics problem here. Subsequent experiments showed that to turn these things into this state, you need temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius, about 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit. Let me make this clear for you. Bronze Age technology could not do that. Campfire? No. Pottery kiln? No. A citywide fire set by an enemy? Still not hot enough. 2,000 degrees Celsius is the surface temperature of some dwarf stars or the epicenter of a nuclear explosion. What the hell happened here in 1650 BC? The answer lies with the inhabitants of this city, or what's left of them. Archaeologists didn't find skeletons lying neatly in graves. They found fragments. Forensic analysis reveals a brutality that was clinical, the phrase I used in the previous part. Bones torn apart, joints disarticulated to an extreme degree. No signs of disease, no signs of starvation from a long siege. Whatever happened here, it happened in a split second. 1 second they were cooking, the next, they were shredded at a molecular level. When human history cannot explain it, we must look to the sky. Enter Dr. James Kennett, an expert on cosmic impact events. He's the guy you call when you suspect a space rock visited Earth. Kennett looked into the ashes of el-Hammam and found fingerprints of the cosmos. He found spherules, vaporized iron and silica that cooled in midair. He found melted platinum, iridium, nickel, things that usually accompany meteorites. He even found what appear to be nanodiamonds, carbon crushed by unimaginable pressure. And the strangest thing? Salt. not natural rock salt, an insane concentration of salt, up to 25% in some samples, coating the ruins like radioactive fallout after a nuclear explosion. Their hypothesis? An asteroid or comet exploded in midair, an airburst. Think of the Tunguska event in 1908 in Siberia, where a space rock flattened 800 square miles of forest without touching the ground. Multiply that power by 1,000 Hiroshima bombs and place it right over a crowded city. That is what they believe happened. The story sounds perfect, doesn't it? God's angry, throwing rocks from the sky. Science confirms. Case closed. But wait, this is dark history, where things are never that simple. In September 2021, the research team published their findings in the prestigious journal Nature Scientific Reports. They presented smoking gun evidence, shocked quartz, mineral grains bearing microscopic fractures that can only be created by the immense pressure of a cosmic impact. The scientific community immediately erupted. Other experts jumped in, looked under microscopes, and screamed, "Wrong!" They argued that the so-called shocked quartz was actually just the result of ordinary geological processes requiring no aliens or sky rocks. The debate dragged on. And then, a few years later, Nature retracted that paper. The reason? Methodological errors in mineralogical analysis. The smoking gun was stripped away. So that's it? We're back to square one? Not exactly. No. Retracting the paper only means they couldn't definitively prove it was an airburst using shocked quartz. But it doesn't change the reality lying on the ground. The pottery is still melted into glass. The 1.5-meter thick layer of ash is still there. The torn-apart skeletons are still screaming in silence. And the 2,000 degrees Celsius temperature remains an undeniable fact. Something extremely catastrophic happened here in 1650 BC. Modern science is scratching its head. But perhaps, just perhaps, an old book that many consider mythology holds the map to the truth. If you were a detective, what is the first thing you would do? Check the crime scene. Then, compare it with witness testimony. We have the scene, Tal el-Hammam, a city melted by 2,000-degree heat. And we have a witness, an ancient, controversial witness, but one possessing the most persistent memory in history, the Bible. Open the book of Genesis, chapter 19. If you overlay the biblical geographic map onto the modern archaeological map, Tal el-Hammam sits exactly, and I emphasize exactly, where the cities of the plain were located. That is the home address of Sodom and Gomorrah. We all know that story: debauchery, sin, and the wrath of God. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Sounds religious, right? But listen to the testimony of Abraham, who watched the event from a distance. He describes that he didn't just see smoke. He saw dense smoke rising from the land like smoke from a giant furnace. Pause for a moment. Smoke from a furnace. If you were a Bronze Age shepherd who had never seen napalm or nuclear weapons, how would you describe a mushroom cloud or a column of hot gas rising after an airburst? Exactly like that. A forced, vertical, dense column of smoke. That isn't a description of a spreading kitchen fire. That is a description of a high-power thermal event. And geography doesn't lie. Genesis 14 says this valley was full of bitumen pits, or natural asphalt. Tal el-Hammam sits right on top of a geological powder keg. Oil and natural gas leak to the surface. If a flaming meteor fell here, or exploded in the air, it wouldn't just be an impact. It would trigger a sea of fire. But here is the part that sends shivers down my spine. It didn't just happen to one city. Archaeologists drew a 25-kilometer radius circle around Tal el-Hammam. Do you know what they found? over 20 settlements, all abandoned, not scattered, but all at once. Around 1650 BC, tens of thousands of people vanished from the map. Cities like Tal Nimrin, Tal Bleibel, candidates for the biblical names Admah and Zeboim, all shared the same fate. Burnt structures, collapsed walls, and absolute silence. Think like a real estate agent. The Jordan Valley is prime land. Plenty of water, fertile soil. People never abandon land like that unless they can no longer survive there. And the reality is they didn't come back. For the next 300 to 600 years, this area was a dead zone. Archaeologists call it the Late Bronze Age Gap. Why? The answer lies in the soil. Salt. Remember the detail of Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt? Maybe it's a metaphor, or maybe it's a gruesome factual observation of instant calcification. But on a larger scale, the explosion, whatever it was, vaporized a massive amount of salt water from the Dead Sea or underground salt layers, then scattered it across the valley like a toxic rain. A 4% salt concentration in agricultural soil is a death sentence for crops. Wheat died, barley died, no food, no life. The land flowing with milk and honey was salted in the literal sense. It took centuries of rain to wash it away before life dared to return. But the story doesn't stop at the borders of Israel, because thousands of miles to the east, in the cradle of human civilization, the Sumerians were trembling and writing down similar things. They didn't call it the wrath of Yahweh, they called it the storm of Enlil. And what they describe in these clay tablets will make you ask yourself, are our ancestors telling disjointed fables, or were they collectively witnessing a continent-scale catastrophe? If you are still awake at this hour, perhaps you are like me, unsatisfied with easy answers. We have left the scorched Jordan Valley to come to Sumer, humanity's first literate civilization. Don't look down on them. In 3200 BC, when the ancestors of many other peoples were still struggling to strike fire with stones, the Sumerians were calculating square roots, cube roots, and mapping the stars with a precision we only caught up with once we had telescopes. They were obsessed with record keeping. They recorded everything, from slave sales contracts to the positions of planets. So when they wrote about destruction, they weren't writing science fiction. They were writing reports. And their reports, the Laments, describe a weapon that does not belong to humans. In the Lament for they don't speak of catapults or siege ladders. They speak of an ugnum, a storm, or a destructive force descending from the sky. They name the culprits: Enlil, Enki, Ninmah, the Anunnaki gods. The text describes Imhul, the evil wind. It didn't just blow roofs off. It was a strange wind that made the foundations of the land shake, turned the sky black, and most importantly, it left invisible death. Corpses were scattered but bore no wounds from spears. Animals died instantly. People died right in their homes as if their life had been switched off. This is where the story turns into its most controversial direction, where the line between archaeology and conspiracy theory blurs. Let's talk about Zechariah Sitchin. To mainstream academia, Sitchin is a dreamer, a guy who mistranslated Sumerian grammar to sell books. But to millions of readers, he is the one who dared to speak the taboo. Sitchin believed that descriptions of blinding light, mushroom clouds, and poisonous wind in ancient texts were not metaphors. He argued that they were ancient descriptions of nuclear weapons. According to this crazy scenario, Sodom, Gomorrah, and the Sumerian cities were not hit by meteors. They were victims of a purge between Anunnaki factions. The salt and the barrenness of the land, that was radioactive fallout. Lot's wife? Calcification due to extreme thermal radiation. Calm down. Before you put your tinfoil hat on to ward off aliens, listen to the voice of reason. Modern science brought Geiger counters there. The result? No radiation. No misplaced uranium. Linguists also point out, tukul in Sumerian just means weapon, a pickaxe, or a stick, not a cruise missile. But whether you believe in a sky rock, Airburst, like Dr. Kennett, or believe in the wrath of God like the Bible, or believe in Star Wars like Sitchin, there is an undeniable physical truth remaining on the ground. 2,000 degrees Celsius, melted mud bricks, and a brilliant civilization wiped out in a split second. Maybe the Sumerians and the writers of the Bible didn't know about astrophysics. They saw the sky on fire, they saw cities vaporize, and they called it God. As for us, modern humans with advanced machines, we look at those vitrified pottery shards and call it a meteor. Whatever the name, the message from 3,600 years ago still echoes through to tonight, through your screen. Our civilization, no matter how solid, is just sandcastles. And sometimes a wave from the cosmos or from within the earth can wash it all away, leaving only broken pottery and stories told in the night. Do you believe in the apocalypse? No, I'm not talking about zombies or robots rebelling. I'm talking about the way this world can wipe you out so fast your brain doesn't even realize you're dead. This thing looks like a defective emerald, doesn't it? If you found it in New Mexico, congratulations, you are holding Trinitite. It is desert sand melted by the first atomic bomb test in 1945. The epicenter temperature, hotter than the surface of the sun. But here is the interesting part. If I handed you a piece exactly like this, but told you it was found in the ruins of a city that died 3,600 years ago, what would you say? That the ancients had nuclear reactors? Or that someone high above decided to drop a match into humanity's powder keg? Let's go back to Tal el-Hammam. Scholars call it an archaeological site. I call it the messiest crime scene of the century. Look at these pottery shards. Normally, pottery is very stubborn. To deform it like this, you need heat. A lot of heat. We are talking about the number 2,000 degrees Celsius. Let me give you some context. Volcanic lava is only about 1,200 degrees. So what happened? A kitchen fire? No. A conventional war? Sorry, but bows and arrows and torches don't melt mud bricks into glass. At the scene, human bones weren't just broken. They were fragmented, blown apart, and mixed into the soil and rock as if someone threw them into a giant blender. Material analysis shows the destruction was nearly instantaneous. No warning, no time to scream. If you were a homicide detective walking into this scene without knowing the date, you would conclude immediately, oh, this is a thermobaric or nuclear explosion. But this is the Bronze Age, folks. An era where the highest tech was the plow. So then, who is the culprit? We have two main witnesses. Both are very respectable, and both tell stories that make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Witness number one, the Bible. Sodom and Gomorrah. Two names synonymous with sin. Debauchery is the mildest word to describe them. God looked down and said, enough. But the best part isn't the destruction. It's Abraham's bargaining. Abraham, hey God, are you really going to kill everyone? What if there are 50 good people? God, okay, for your sake, 50 people. Abraham, so, 45 or 40, 30? Let's settle on 10 people, okay, boss? A negotiation that failed miserably. Couldn't find 10 decent people in an entire city. Result? Kaboom. Fire and brimstone fell like a rain shower. Witness number two. The Sumerian records. They don't call it Sodom, but the script is identical. The only difference is that here, we have a board meeting of the gods. Enlil, the god with the temperament of a toxic boss, votes to destroy. Enki, the more benevolent god, tries to intervene but is overruled. Whether it is the moral judgment of God or the bureaucratic procedure of Sumerian gods, the physical details match frighteningly well. Multiple cities wiped out at once, disaster coming from the sky, land becoming deadly for centuries. This isn't a fairy tale a grandmother tells her grandchild. This is a traumatic memory of humanity. Something truly happened, and it was so terrible that we had to weave divinity into it to explain it. Let's cast religion aside. Let's speak in the language of physics. If it wasn't God throwing fire, then what was it? The most likely answer, an airburst. Imagine a space rock slamming into the atmosphere at 60,000 kilometers per hour. Pressure and heat tear it apart before it can touch the ground. It explodes right over the city. It's like a nuclear bomb, but without the dirty radiation, just shock waves and heat. Genesis says that 5 cities were destroyed, but Zoar, where Lot ran to, was safe. Why? Because God loved Lot? Or because Zoar was located just outside the blast zone? The destruction had directionality. At el-Hammam, debris was blown towards the southwest, northeast. Like a giant hand swept everything away in a straight line. Science calls it a shockwave. The ancients called it the breath of God. And me? I call it the unluckiest coincidence in history. A thriving city located exactly on the trajectory of a cosmic bullet. But, wait. If everything is so clear, why was the scientific paper about this event in the journal Nature retracted in 2025? Why are archaeologists divided like oil and water on this issue? Are we trying to force the truth into the framework of the Bible? Or are there forces in academia that don't want to admit that legends are sometimes more accurate than textbooks? Science is a fickle mistress. Today she tells you this fact is the truth. Tomorrow she slaps you in the face and says, "You were wrong." Let's talk about the airburst that we just praised in the previous part. Sounds cool, sounds logical, right? But life isn't a dream. The earth-shattering scientific paper in the prestigious journal Nature in 2021, the anchor for the hypothesis of a cosmic explosion at el-Hammam, was officially retracted in April 2025. Why? Because other scientists jumped into the fight. They said, hey, those shocked quartz and melted minerals, not from a meteorite. Maybe you guys are just looking at the remains of a burnt-down pottery kiln or ancient metallurgical processes. Sounds like a buzzkill, doesn't it? From a cosmic explosion destroying a civilization down to an occupational accident of a potter? This war isn't just about geology, it is about faith and prejudice. The critical camp smirks. El-Hammam is not Sodom. The dating is off by 100 years compared to the Bible. You guys are just trying to force the data to satisfy your religious imagination. The supporting camp slams the table. Then how do you explain the meter-thick layer of ash? The twisted skeletons? Did they fire their pottery with napalm? Whichever side wins this shouting match, there is a physical truth that no one can deny, and it sits looming right there. The city died. The area was abandoned for centuries after that event, and the story about it still lives on persistently. But this is where things get interesting. If we just stare into the hole in Jordan, we miss the big picture. Because Sodom was not the only victim. Across the ancient world, from Greece to India, everyone has a story about fire from the sky, and their descriptions are suspiciously specific. Let's go to Greece. They tell of Phaethon, the rebellious son of the sun god Helios. The boy borrowed his dad's sun chariot for a joyride, lost control, and scorched the earth before Zeus had to strike him down with a lightning bolt to save the earth. Sounds like a cosmic traffic accident, right? But look further to the east, to India, and hold on to your seats, because this part will give you goosebumps. In the Mahabharata and Ramayana epics, there are descriptions of a divine weapon called the Brahmastra. It wasn't a bow and arrow. It wasn't a sword. Listen to this description, written in Sanskrit thousands of years ago. A single projectile charged with all the power of the universe, an incandescent column of smoke and flame as bright as the 1,000 suns rose in all its splendor. The water boiled, fish were scorched. And here's the creepiest part. The text describes the survivors of that explosion. Their hair and fingernails fell out. Pottery broke without apparent cause. Birds in the sky turned white and fell down dead. Hair and fingernails falling out? That is not a symptom of wounds from swords or blades. That is a clinical symptom of acute radiation poisoning. How? How could ancient epic writers, people who had never seen an electric light bulb, accurately describe the biological consequences of a nuclear explosion? Was it rich imagination? Was it a literary metaphor for the wrath of the gods? Or were they recording what they actually saw? A fragmented memory of a global catastrophe that has been forgotten? Mesopotamia, Egypt, Aztec, China. Every civilization has this script. A glorious city, a flash of light from above, total destruction, barren land. Anthropologists will tell you, "Oh, Zorro, don't be paranoid. That's just how humans explain natural disasters. Earthquakes, volcanoes. They didn't understand plate tectonics, so they made up stories about gods fighting." Maybe. It is very possible I am making up connections that don't exist. But remember tall el-Hammam. Remember the vitrified sand. Remember the crushed skeletons. What if these stories aren't myths, but encoded history? Perhaps humanity has gone through upheavals more violent than we imagine. Events that didn't just wipe out cities, but wiped our memories clean, forcing us to start over with fragments of mythology. And there is a man who believes he knows the answer, a crazy hypothesis about a lost civilization and enemies from the cosmos that are still stalking us. Cycles. History is loops. We build, we develop, we get complacent, and then, boom, the universe hits the reset button. Graham Hancock, the name that makes mainstream archaeologists grind their teeth, has spent his life talking about this. He argues that we are a species with amnesia, that there was an advanced civilization during the Ice Age, wiped out 12,800 years ago by great floods and punches from the sky. People call him a dreamer, but as geological evidence of the Younger Dryas period grows, people are starting to sweat. Is it possible that Sodom and Gomorrah isn't a solitary moral story? Is it possible it's just one chapter in the bloody diary of the times Earth got beaten up? Look at this junkyard. This is the torrid meteor stream. About 20,000 years ago, a giant comet broke apart, leaving behind a vast field of debris. Earth, on its journey around the sun, has to pass through this minefield twice a year. Most of the time, we just see romantic shooting stars. Make a wish, right? But statistical models aren't that romantic. They coldly point out that every 200 to 1,000 years, Earth will take a heavy-duty airburst hit. Look at history. 2200 BC, the abrupt end of the early Bronze Age. Civilizations collapsed en masse. 1200 BC, the collapse of the late Bronze Age. Once again, darkness descended. 1650 BC, Sodom and Gomorrah, Tal el-Hammam, disappeared. Is it a coincidence? Or was Tal el-Hammam just unlucky? A city in the wrong place at the wrong time? when Earth was playing Russian roulette with the torrid stream. A cosmic traffic accident, and the survivors, in their panic, looked up to the sky and uttered, "God, what did we do wrong?" The truth might be that cruel. No judgment, no sin. Just emotionless, celestial mechanics. But the meteor hypothesis has a hole, or at least an incredible coincidence. The destruction wasn't scattered. It was focused. 5 cities, neatly contained within a 25-kilometer radius. To do that, the airburst had to happen at an extremely precise altitude, right over the target, to maximize damage inside the circle and minimize damage outside. Possibility of random occurrence? Yes, but low. This leads us to a darker, crazier hypothesis, but one whispered by some in conspiracy theory forums. Ancient high-tech warfare. Read the Sumerian texts again. Don't read like a theologian. Read like a military engineer. When they talk about the 7 weapons of the Anunnaki, what if that's not a metaphor? What if the Council of Gods was actually a general staff? What if Enlil's curse was actually a weapon activation code? Proponents of this theory argue that we are looking at an ancient nuclear war, recorded by prehistoric people who had no vocabulary for bomb or missile, so they called them spells and flaming arrows. They point to other sites, like Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan. Let me pour a bucket of cold water on your excitement. The story about radioactive skeletons at Mohenjo-Daro? Myth. Fabrication. No archaeological report records unusually high radiation levels. Those skeletons were found in messy sediment layers, and it's more likely they died of disease or were massacred by conventional weapons, not atomic bombs. But vitrification is real. At Mohenjo-Daro, some brick walls were melted. In Egypt and Libya, we find this: Libyan desert glass. Thousands of square miles of sand turned into beautiful yellow silica glass. A scarab beetle carved from this stone even rested on the chest of King Tutankhamun. To create it, you need heat. The heat of a nuclear explosion. But its age? 29 million years. Humans hadn't even appeared then, let alone built bombs. Unless you believe dinosaurs developed a nuclear program, an interesting idea for a cartoon, but silly in reality. The only remaining cause is meteors. So where are we in this mess? If the high-tech hypothesis is a mistake caused by us imposing modern thinking on the past, the question remains, why did the Sumerians describe the guilt of the gods? The lament texts describe the gods regretting. They looked down at the destruction and realized they had gone too far. The mother no longer recognizes her child. The father no longer recognizes his son. The evil wind blows, and silence covers all. We often read history as numbers: 8,000 dead, 36 hectares flattened. But tragedy doesn't lie in numbers. It lies in people. When the city walls collapsed and the sky caught fire, no one cared about the physics of the airburst. They only knew to run. And among those fleeing, there was a woman who made a fatal mistake. She turned her head back. Lot's wife. One of the most haunting images in the Bible. She looked back at her burning hometown, and boom, she turned into a pillar of salt. What do theologians say? That is the punishment for disobedience. That is the price of material attachment. But look at this through the lens of the tall el-Hammam crime scene. If a thermobaric explosion occurred, the shockwave and extreme heat would travel at hypersonic speed. Lot and his daughters ran ahead, perhaps just enough to get behind a ridge or out of the direct kill zone. But the wife? Maybe she slowed down a beat. Maybe she tripped. Or simply, she turned back out of human instinct. And when the temperature of thousands of degrees Celsius hit, It didn't turn her into table salt in the literal sense. It calcined her body instantly. The water in her body vaporized in a split second, leaving behind a stark white mineral shell, frozen stiff in the desert. That wasn't magic. That was the cruelty of thermodynamics. She died standing, frozen in the most terrifying moment of her life, an eternal monument to destruction. Now let's talk about the geographical smoking gun. For years, archaeologists looked for Sodom south of the Dead Sea, like Bab-ed-Dara. Why? Out of habit. But Dr. Stephen Collins did a crazy thing. He actually read the Bible like a map. Genesis describes Sodom as lying in the region of the Kikar, an ancient Hebrew word meaning a round disk, or a circular plain. Only one place matches that description, north of the Dead Sea, where the Jordan River flows out creating a fertile plain. And when digging at Tal el-Hammam, the center of that circular disk, what did Collins find? Not just ash, but directionality. Every pottery shard, every crumbled wall points in one direction. The shockwave came from the southwest angle. It fits perfectly with the biblical description. Abraham, standing at Bethel to the west, looked down and saw smoke rising. Lot ran to Zoar. The explosion happened somewhere in midair, wiping out 5 cities but sparing Zoar at the edge. It is chillingly accurate. If this is a fabrication, the person who made it up must have been a genius in geography and atmospheric physics. Sodom and Gomorrah were wiped out. The fertile land once compared to the garden of the Lord was poisoned by salt from the explosion, becoming a dead zone uncultivable for 600 years after. But the story lives on. Why? Because the Sumerians wrote laments, not to preach morality, but to weep. The mother turns away from her daughter. The father abandons his son. That is trauma literature. And the Hebrews? They turned it into a moral warning. They zipped this painful historical event into a mythological file named Genesis, so their descendants would never forget, to remind them that civilization is more fragile than we think. Whether you believe it was a meteor or believe it was the hand of God, the result remains unchanged. We are living on a planet spinning amidst a violent universe. Our skyscrapers today, are they any different from the watchtowers of Tal el-Hammam back then? Arrogance, complacency, and oblivion. Those are the true sins of Sodom. Perhaps next time, when you see a shooting star streak across the night sky, don't be so quick to make a wish. Pray that it is just a speck of dust and not another messenger from the cosmos. We, humans, are a pitifully arrogant species. We sit in reinforced concrete apartments, scrolling through smartphones, and delude ourselves into thinking we are the bosses of this planet. Safe, solid, invincible. But you know what? History, or rather dark history, has an incredibly cruel sense of humor. It loves to laugh in the faces of the most confident. We often read the Mahabharata or Popol Vuh epics and smirk. Oh, ancient people had such rich imaginations. Gods shooting lightning, fire from the high heavens, cities blown away, Stone Age Marvel movies. But be careful with that skepticism. Troy was considered a fairy tale until Heinrich Schliemann picked up a shovel and dug it up. Mycenae, too. And the jungle cities of the Maya as well. The archaeologist's shovel is the greatest enemy of skepticism, and today that shovel has touched something far more terrifying than a crumbled city wall. It touched a crime scene from 4,000 years ago. Look at the map of the ancient Middle East. We are talking about Tal el-Hammam, or as many believe, the prototype of Sodom, the city of sin in the Bible. But forget religion for a moment. Look at it from a human perspective. Imagine you are a citizen of Tal el-Hammam around 1650 BC. You wake up. A beautiful day. Blue sky, white clouds, golden sun. You think about how much cloth you'll sell today or what you'll eat tonight. You see, they were exactly like us. They thought today would be like yesterday and tomorrow would follow today. Normality is the strongest sedative, isn't it? The market opens. The sound of children laughing and chasing each other around the fountains, merchants bargaining. A civilization at its peak, vibrant and noisy. 8,000 souls breathing, loving, plotting, and hoping. And then, boom. No, the word boom is too mild. The sky suddenly glowed brighter than the sun. Not a harsh, sunny day, but a blinding glare that tore through retinas. A second sun appeared, but it didn't bring life. It brought death. An invisible shockwave weighing 1,000 tons slammed down. The most solid buildings were flattened like houses made of cards. Fire. Not fire from a stove, but hellfire incinerating everything in an instant. In seconds, I repeat, just seconds, those 8,000 humans were no longer human. They became history. No time to run. No time to pray. Their brains didn't even have time to process the pain signal before their bodies were erased. Survivors watching from the surrounding hills, trembling in terror, could only draw one single conclusion: the gods are angry. But we, with modern wisdom, we know it wasn't Zeus or God throwing lightning. It was astrophysics, an uninvited guest from the cosmos. You think after such a disaster what would remain? Ruins, certainly. But there is something more persistent than stone. Pain. The ancient Sumerians, those curious and meticulous neighbors, did something we often forget in this digital age. They recorded it. Picture a scribe sitting in flickering candlelight, holding a stylus, pressing hard into wet clay. They didn't write weather reports. They wrote laments. Make no mistake, this isn't romantic poetry. These are screams condensed into text. What did they write? They wrote about the smell of burnt flesh in the wind. They wrote about how ash scattered across the plain like black snow. They wrote about layers of toxic salt that killed the soil, making not a blade of grass grow for centuries after. And most painfully, they wrote, "The mother looks away to avoid her daughter's eyes." Can you feel the weight of those words? Why did the mother have to turn away? Because she couldn't save her child? Or because what remained of the child was too horrible to look at? That isn't theology. That is ancient battlefield journalism. That is tears mixed with mud. These lines are 4,000 years old, but if you read them aloud right now, they sound no different from the account of a survivor of the atomic bombing in Hiroshima. Pain is the only universal language that pierces through time. Now, come with me to the Baghdad Museum. Don't worry about tickets. We're going through the back door of history. In a glass case under dim light lies a tiny clay tablet. Catalog number IM 75680. It looks like nothing special, a cracked lump of baked earth, but it holds a shocking secret. Found in 1948 at Nippur, the religious capital of the Sumerians, this tablet dates to around 1900 BC, meaning it was written about 350 years after that fateful day. 350 years. That's equivalent to the distance from the time of Emperor Quang-Trung to right now. For those 3 centuries, the story of the 5 cities consumed by fire was passed down by word of mouth, from father to son, from grandmother to grandchild, before someone decided to press it into clay forever. The tablet details the destruction. But what makes me, Zorro, shudder isn't the description of death. It's the note at the end of the text. A message sent across time, a time capsule. The scribe wrote, May this not happen again. Let it be remembered so it can be prevented. Pause for a moment. Think about that. That isn't a prayer sent to the god Enlil or Marduk. That is a message for you, for me, for us, for those living in this 21st century. Remember, don't let it happen again. How ironic. They beg us to prevent it. But how can we prevent a space rock hurtling at 60,000 kilometers per hour? Or did they mean prevent our own arrogance? 4,000 years have passed. We are still arguing. Is it a meteor or an alien atomic bomb? Is it Sodom in the Bible or just a fable? We are busy arguing about the cause and forgetting the lesson. The lesson is very simple, cold, and cruel. Civilization is not eternal. We build skyscrapers on floodplains. We cram millions of people into earthquake fault zones. We live as if tomorrow is always guaranteed. The people of el-Hammam thought the same on that fateful morning, and all that remains of them now are melted pottery shards and a layer of pitch-black ash underground. So what is the concrete evidence? Is it really an explosion from space? Or is Zorro just blowing smoke? In the next part, I will take you down into the excavation pit, pick up a microscope, and look straight into the monster's face. We will see things that ordinary fire can never do. Pottery turned to glass, and bones torn apart by an invisible force. Beautiful, aren't they? The stars. We often look up there to make wishes, to seek romance. But you know what? To the universe, we aren't the favorite children. We are moving targets. Right above my head and yours, in that silent darkness, are millions of asteroids flying in orbit. Most are harmless pebbles, but just a few, a very few, are big enough to turn your today into doomsday. We like to lull ourselves to sleep with technology. Oh, Zorro, don't worry, NASA is on watch. Yes, NASA has a catalog of near-Earth objects, NEO. They are tracking, but tracking doesn't mean stopping. Like seeing a truck losing control, barreling towards you, you know it's coming, but you have no brakes. And scarier? Even with 21st century technology, we can still be blind. A Tunguska-level object, the kind that can flatten a major city like London or New York, can still approach Earth without any warning. The Sumerians didn't have radar. The people of el-Hammam, or Sodom, if you want to call it that, didn't either. One moment before, they existed. One moment after, nothingness. No sirens, no emergency alerts on phones, only obliteration. That is the fragility of human civilization. We build castles on sand and pretend the waves don't exist. So what happens when a disaster is so terrible that the human brain cannot process it? It turns into myth. Genesis chapter 19. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah consumed by fire and sulfur from the sky. For over 3,000 years, it has haunted the human imagination. People used it to preach about morality, about sin, about punishment. But cast the religious lens aside. Look at it as Zorro is looking, a witness file. Finding el-Hammam isn't about proving the Bible right or wrong. I don't care about your theology. What I care about is the core truth lying beneath layers of the dust of time. That story exists because it actually happened. The survivors, suffering severe psychological trauma, having lost their homes, lost their loved ones, what did they do? They told the story, from one generation to the next. Details might be exaggerated. Fire turns into God's wrath, but the kernel of truth remains. Something terrible fell here. It is a covenant between the past and the future. The dead are screaming through 4,000 years. We were there, we saw, and now you know. All right, enough philosophy. pick up the shovel. We are going to the crime scene. In 2005, Dr. Stephen Collins started excavating Tall el-Hammam. What did he expect? A typical Middle Bronze Age settlement. You know, mud brick walls, a few broken pots, traces of ancient dinners. Boring, right? But instead, he collided with a mystery that would consume 15 years of his life. Look at the structure of the site. The upper city sits precariously 30 meters above the plain. According to normal archaeological logic, you would see gradual accumulation, layer stacked upon layer over centuries. But here, no. Stratigraphy is completely wrong. Buildings didn't collapse due to age. They were sheared off midsection, as if a giant blade swept through. Streets didn't end at city gates. They ended in pulverized debris fields. And the freakish thing covering it all, a layer of ash and carbonized material up to 1.5 meters thick. 1.5 meters of ash. Can you picture that? To create that amount of ash, you need to burn down a tropical rainforest, not a desert city built of mud brick. This ash layer is a fingerprint of catastrophe, a pitch-black scar cutting across the timeline. It shouldn't exist there, but it stands tall, defying every conventional explanation. In that pile of ashes, Dr. Collins found the first witness. Not a human, but pottery. Pottery of that time was fired in kilns, temperatures around 900 degrees Celsius, hard enough to hold water, hold barley. But the pottery shards at Tall el-Hammam are telling a crazy story. Look at this piece, one side inside, still rough, normal pottery, but the outside, it has transformed. It is glossy. It has boiled bubbles. It has turned into glass. Folks, pottery doesn't naturally turn into glass. To do this, you need heat. A lot of heat. Dr. Ted Bunch, an expert on geological impacts, looked at it under an electron microscope. The results made him break out in a cold sweat. Temperatures exceeded 2,000 degrees Celsius. Let me compare for you to understand. A forest fire, about 800 degrees. A house burnt to the ground, maximum 1,200 degrees. Volcanic lava, also just around that range. 2,000 degrees Celsius is the surface temperature of some stars. It is hot enough to melt rock, to vaporize metal, and more importantly, it only happened in a fraction of a second. The pottery didn't crack, which would happen if heated slowly. It melted instantly in place, the surface boiling furiously while the inside remained cold. What could create that temperature? A volcano? No, the Jordan Valley has no volcanoes. Lightning strike? Lightning doesn't hit all 8,000 pottery jars at the same time. There is only one single suspect left, a suspect coming from the sky. But temperature is only half the story. The other half is pressure. What they found in the bones and the stones at Tall el-Hammam will prove that death came to them faster than the speed of sound. Do you believe witnesses? Humans tend to lie. Memories tend to be distorted. But rocks? Rocks are brutally honest. In the previous part, we saw pottery melted into glass at 2,000 degrees Celsius. But if there were only heat, skeptics could still argue stubbornly. Maybe they had some super advanced kiln, who knows? Fair enough. So let's talk about pressure. Let's talk about the punch of the cosmos. Look at these walls. In the ancient Near East, people built houses with mud brick, clay mixed with straw, dried in the sun. Simple, effective, cheap. They were strong enough to withstand rain and sun, even sieges by catapults. But at Tall el-Hammam, these bricks didn't break. They flowed. Archaeologists found mud brick masses that had deformed, flowed like volcanic lava, and then hardened into a glazed shell. Inside it was still porous, but the outside was as hard as rock. The roof? The clay roofing dripped down onto the floor. Imagine your ceiling suddenly melting and dripping down like molten candle wax, forming ceramic stalactites right in the middle of your living room. And wood? The load-bearing wooden beams were vaporized, not burnt to charcoal, mind you. They disappeared completely, leaving only hollow voids within the baked clay where matter used to exist. That is a sign of extreme temperature hitting so fast that matter transitioned directly from solid to gas. A giant slaughterhouse where your own home turns to attack you. But this is the terminator of all arguments. This is the CSI evidence that no defense lawyer can deny. Shocked quartz. What is quartz? It's sand, it's rock, it's the most common thing on Earth. It is inert, stubborn, and very hard to change. To deform the crystal structure of quartz, you need immense pressure. Specifically, over 5 gigapascals. What does 5 gigapascals mean? Imagine being crushed under a pillar of rock 20 kilometers high. That is the weight needed to create these characteristic microscopic cracks, known as planar deformation features. In nature, only 2 things create this pressure: a nuclear explosion, a meteorite impact at cosmic velocity. The research team found shocked quartz scattered all over Tall el-Hammam. Under a polarized light microscope, they appear crisscrossed with fracture lines. But, and this is a massive but, there is no crater. If a meteorite slammed into the ground, it would leave a giant hole, like the crater in Arizona. Here, the ground is still flat. Conclusion? An airburst, just like the Tunguska event in Russia in 1908. The meteorite exploded in the sky, creating a shock wave that slammed into the ground like Thor's hammer. It didn't drill deep into the soil. It slapped the surface of the earth. And that slap was so powerful, it deformed even the molecular structure of stone. From which direction did that slap come? The crime scene answers immediately. Everything was blown away in a consistent direction, from southwest to northeast. Broken pottery shards didn't fall in place. They flew more than 20 meters, embedding into neighbors' walls like shrapnel. The palace complex, the White House of the city, was a 5-story fortress with walls more than 4 meters thick. It was designed to be impregnable, but the shockwave treated it like a toy model. The palace didn't collapse. It was sheared off. 12 meters of architectural height were pulverized, compressed down into a dense layer of rubble. The walls weren't breached by enemies. They were crushed by a giant invisible hand pressing down from above. We've talked about brick and stone. Now let's talk about humans. This part is not for the faint of heart. Human remains at Tall el-Hammam are extremely scarce. Why? A city of 8,000 people and no bodies found? The answer lies in the bone fragments they did find. Extreme fragmentation. The joints were disarticulated. There are no complete skeletons. A piece of femur here, a piece of skull there, scattered throughout rooms and streets. Forensic experts determined this was peri-mortem trauma, injury at the moment of death, not caused by wild dogs or scavengers afterward. The shockwave tore their bodies apart instantly. The same injury pattern we see in victims of modern bombing. No one was in a defensive posture. No one was curled up holding their head. No one gathered near the exits to flee. They died right where they stood. The person cooking died by the stove. The person sleeping died in bed. So fast that the nervous system didn't have time to realize they were dead. Instant obliteration. Perhaps that was a mercy. They didn't have to suffer prolonged pain. Just lights out. End of movie. And finally, the most persistent enemy, salt. Scientists found salt concentrations in the destruction layer reaching up to 25%. Normal agricultural soil never has that amount of salt. Salt kills crops. Salt is a death sentence for civilization. Where from? The Dead Sea, 15 kilometers away. The scariest hypothesis. The explosion was so powerful that it blasted water from the Dead Sea up, or vaporized a massive amount of salt water and rained it down across the valley like a toxic acid rain. Salt soaked into the soil. It poisoned the fertile fields. That is why, after this event, the tall el-Hammam area was completely abandoned for 600 years. 6 centuries of silence. No one dared to return. The land was cursed. The Bible tells that Lot's wife turned into a pillar of salt when she looked back. A metaphorical detail? Or a distorted memory of the white salt sediment covering human bodies? We have 2,000-degree heat, 5 gigapascals of pressure, hypersonic shockwave, shredded bones, and salt-poisoned Earth. The picture is complete. An asteroid exploded in the sky over the Jordan Valley. But the story doesn't end here. Because if it happened once, it can happen again. And next time, the victims won't be Sumerians with clay tablets. It will be us. Look at that. Brilliant, isn't it? We are proud of these neon lights. We are proud of concrete, reinforced steel, and silicon chips. We think we have evolved far beyond those Bronze Age shepherds, that we are the new gods of Earth. But 4,000 years ago, the people of Tall el-Hammam stood atop their city walls and thought exactly the same thing. They thought they were safe. They thought their civilization was eternal. And then the universe threw a rock. Just one rock. And eternal turned into ash in the blink of an eye. Do you know what is lurking above our heads right now? Millions of asteroids. Most of them are harmless space junk. But statistics don't lie. There will come a day, not if, but when, a giant big enough will decide to visit Earth again. NASA is working hard. They catalog, they track. But let's be realistic, my naive friends. Tracking is not stopping. Knowing a bullet is flying towards you doesn't mean you can catch it with your bare hands. And scarier still, there are things we cannot see. A Tunguska or tall el-Hammam level object could rush out from the direction of the sun, hidden by the blinding glare, and slam into the atmosphere before any radar system could sound the alarm. The Sumerians had no warning. The people of Sodom and Gomorrah had no warning. One moment they were bargaining at the market. The next moment, they were shadows printed on stone walls. Destruction needs no forewarning. It doesn't care if you are rich or poor, if you believe in God or in science. It simply obliterates. But amidst that devastation, humans did something extraordinary, something that makes me, a professional skeptic, tip my hat in respect. They didn't just die. They remembered. Let's go back to those poor scribes by the candlelight, trembling as they pressed the stylus into the clay. Why did they write those painful lines? Why did they record the smell of burning flesh, the wind direction, and the mother's horror? Because they understood one thing that we, in the era of TikTok and 24-hour news, have forgotten. Knowledge is sacred. Memory is the only immortality. They knew they couldn't rebuild the city overnight. They couldn't resurrect the dead, but they could do one thing: warn the future. The clay tablet IM75680 in the Baghdad Museum is not just an administrative record. It is a message in a bottle dropped into the river of time. It says, "Hey, you people in the future, this happened to us. It was real. Don't let it happen to you." Genesis chapter 19 is the same. Don't read it as a moral rule book. Read it as a survival diary. Lot and his family were witnesses. The story of the wife turning to stone, of the city consumed by fire, is how ancient people encoded disaster so their descendants would never forget. It shifts from history to legend to myth. But the core remains the truth. An extinction-level event happened here. So, What have we learned after digging for 15 years at el-Hammam? That Sodom and Gomorrah were real? Certainly. That the Bible has a historical basis? Possibly. That the universe is trying to kill us? Clearly. But the biggest lesson lies in humility. We still build megacities on fault lines. We still ignore climate warnings. We still live as if we are immortal. The melted bricks at el-Hammam are laughing in our faces. They say, "We were once as proud as you. We were once as loud as you. And now we are glass and salt." Archaeology is not about finding treasure. It is about listening to ghosts. People often say, "Look on the bright side of history." Sorry, but we don't do that here. We prefer rummaging through the ashes. And today, we are going to visit a site where Mother Nature, or some cosmic giant, decided to host the biggest BBQ party of the Bronze Age. And the only thing is, the main course on the menu was chili salt grilled city. And believe me, it didn't taste good. Let's start with the evidence. Archaeologists at el-Hammam found this. Salt. Not the salt you sprinkle on French fries. We are talking about particles ranging from fine dust to the size of a thumb. Their distribution? A teasing joke of physics. Heavy particles lay in low areas. Light particles flew up high. This only happens when you throw everything into the sky like confetti, and then let gravity clean up the battlefield. But here is the interesting part, or rather, the horror part. The salt didn't just coat the surface like winter snow. It burrowed inside. It soaked into every fiber of the baked earth, every crack of the pottery. Picture this. The temperature at that moment was so hot that brick walls and pottery jars gaped open from thermal shock. And then, boom! A blast of superheated salt vapor rushed in, filling every nook and cranny. It's like your house getting marinated in spices right while it's burning down. A chillingly thoughtful touch from the Grim Reaper. So, who was the chef of this salty feast? All eyes turned to the sullen neighbor, the Dead Sea. The name says it all, right? No one calls it the Happy Sea. The hypothesis here is, an airburst occurring right over the water turned this lake into an instant soup pot. Extreme heat vaporized the water in a split second, carrying tons of salt and slapping it straight onto the mainland. Result? Hypersalinity, a fancy scientific word to describe land being completely poisoned. Forget farming. The land here was sterilized. You sow a seed, the seed looks at you and says, "Are you kidding me?" Agriculture dies, meaning empty bellies. And empty bellies mean civilization closes up shop. Simple as that. If you think the current real estate market is bad, look at the Jordan Valley back then. After this event, the whole area was wiped out. Over 20 cities and towns, where tens of thousands of people once lived, argued, loved, suddenly became as silent as a ghost town. The population plummeted from tens of thousands down to a few hundred scavengers wandering around picking up scraps. And how long did this silence last? A decade? A century? No. From 3 to 6 centuries. Let that number sink in. 600 years. That is enough time for us to go from the Lalois era to the era of the iPhone. During all that time, this area was a literal no man's land. People avoided it. Perhaps they whispered to each other, "Don't go there. The gods are sulking there." el-Hammam, once a megacity, was never rebuilt. It became a tell, a giant tomb filled with the trash of the past, lying bare to the rain and wind. A rather humiliating end for an empire. Now, open the best-selling book of all time, the Bible. Whether you believe it or not, this description fits suspiciously well. Genesis tells that Abraham stood at a VIP spot high up near Bethel, looking down at the valley. And what did he see? A romantic scene? No. The smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. Furnace. The biblical author didn't compare it to a cooking fire. He used heavy industrial imagery. That is the ancient way of saying, that place is hot as hell. Sodom wasn't just destroyed. It was formatted off the earth's hard drive. It became nothingness, a name synonymous with total destruction. But Abraham was just an observer looking from afar. There were others who saw this event closer, in more detail, and they didn't use gentle religious metaphors. The Sumerians. What did they record? Not a moral judgment, but a technical report of a weapon disaster. In the previous part, we saw Abraham viewing the destruction through the lens of religious faith, a giant furnace of judgment. But if you want to know what actually smashed down on the heads of those poor people, you have to ask the Sumerians. They didn't write hymns, they wrote crime scene reports. And this report, ladies and gentlemen, reads more like the script of a disaster movie than mythology. There is an ancient text called the Lament. The name sounds gloomy, right? But the content inside is far more terrifying. It describes the same destructive event we are discussing, but from a completely different perspective. Listen to what the scribe recorded. A storm struck without warning. The sky turned dark in the middle of the day. Fire didn't rise from the ground, but fell from above. It consumed the roofs before touching the foundations. But this is the part that makes me shudder. The city is destroyed by the pickaxe, but no enemy holds it. Buildings turned to rubble, but no army did it. The people are scattered like grain, but no wind from the earth moved them. Do you get what they mean? They are trying to describe an extremely powerful physical force of destruction, capable of dismantling architectural structures like taking apart Lego, but with no human participation, no soldiers, no siege engines, only pure, invisible, and brutal destruction. People scattered like grain. Imagine a shockwave blast throwing human bodies hundreds of meters away. That is exactly what they are describing. The Sumerian scribe asserts, this is not literary metaphor. They are trying to record observed phenomena using the limited vocabulary of 2000 BC. They use the word tool. Scholars translate it as tool or instrument. It suggests something mechanical, manufactured, not magic summoned out of thin air. And what is the effect of this tool? Creates umu, extreme heat and light. Creates imhol, a kind of evil wind. This evil wind left residue that prevented plants from growing, made water undrinkable, and caused strange sickness in survivors. Sound familiar? If you are thinking of radioactive fallout or chemical pollution, then congratulations, you are thinking exactly like me. This is a desperate attempt to catalog the symptoms of an unnatural disaster. If the Lament is a field report, then the Era Epic is the weapon specification sheet. This Babylonian text, based on older Sumerian sources, doesn't beat around the bush. It lists 7 types of weapons deployed by Era, god of war and plague, to punish 5 rebellious cities. 5 cities. This number matches perfectly with the 5 cities of the Jordan Plain in the Bible. And look at the descriptions of these toys. The type that creates blinding light, brighter than daylight at midnight. Flash blindness, anyone? The type that creates mushroom clouds rising straight to the stratosphere. Yes, mushrooms. Not shiitake mushrooms. The type that creates wind strong enough to flatten jungles and level mountains. How could a person living in the Bronze Age imagine a mushroom cloud rising to the stratosphere if they hadn't witnessed it with their own eyes? Human imagination has limits. We usually imagine based on what is known. So what the hell did they see? Some skeptics will say, "Oh, this is just fictional fairy tales." Fine, then explain this geographical accuracy. Authors of that time didn't have satellites, didn't have Google Maps, and certainly didn't have GPS coordinates. But the era epic places the 5 destroyed cities exactly where modern archaeology finds evidence of catastrophic destruction. They specify the location, the Jordan Plain east of the Dead Sea. They describe the characteristic, territory rich in bitumen, asphalt. This precision is not accidental. It's like finding a tattered old treasure map, and when following it, you actually find a giant bomb crater right at the X mark. The Bible speaks of Sodom and Gomorrah. The era epic speaks of 5 rebellious cities. Archaeology finds tall el-Hammam and its satellites incinerated at the same time. 3 independent data sources. One conclusion? Boom. But wait, there is still a problem. Many people previously thought Sodom was located in the south, Bab ed-Dra. Why are we sure it is tall el-Hammam in the north? The answer lies right in the line of sight of Lot and Abraham, and it involves a simple geometry problem that anyone can solve. It is time we settle the biggest contradiction in this case, the location. For decades, scholars pointed south of the Dead Sea to 2 sites named Bab ed-Dra and Numera. They said, "Look, there's charcoal. This is definitely Sodom and Gomorrah." But sorry, that is lazy investigation. Those 2 sites are like cheap miniature models of the real event. They are too small, too old, and most importantly, they are in the completely wrong place. Let me prove it to you with a simple geometry exercise that a child could understand. Open Genesis chapter 13 again. The story tells that Abraham and Lot stood on a high point near Bethel to divide the land. Lot looked toward Sodom and the whole plain of the Jordan, saw it was well watered, so he chose to move his tents there. The problem lies here, line of sight. If you stand at Bethel today, near modern Ramallah, and look south, where Bab ed-Dra is, what do you see? You see mountains. The massive Moab mountain range blocks your face. You absolutely cannot see the southern basin from Bethel. That is physics. Light doesn't bend around mountains. But if you look north, bingo. Tall el-Hammam sits proudly on the high ground, hitting your eyes from miles away. It sits right in the circular disk, Kikar, of the Jordan Valley. Lot chose what he saw. He didn't choose a location hidden by mountains. Unless Lot had Superman's X-ray eyes, Sodom must be in the north. Let's talk about scale. The Bible and ancient texts describe Sodom as a metropolis. It had a king, an army, bustling commercial activity enough to attract travelers and angels. How wide is Bab ed-Dra? Less than 5 hectares. It's more like a gas station stop than a city. And tall el-Hammam? 36 hectares. It was the monster of the region at that time. It was surrounded by thick city walls, watchtowers, and palaces. If you wanted to destroy a symbol of human arrogance and power, where would you target? The roadside gas station or the skyscraper in the center? The answer is too obvious. Critics often cling to dating. They say, but Abraham lived around 2000 BC, while tall el-Hammam was destroyed around 1650 BC. It's out of sync. Actually, not quite. Biblical chronology is not a Swiss watch. It has a margin of error, and radiocarbon dating does too. The gap between 2000 BC and 1650 BC lies within the acceptable overlap of these margins, but the scariest match isn't the start date, it's the end. The Bible says Sodom was destroyed and never rebuilt. It is an eternal lesson. Archaeology says, Tall el-Hammam was wiped out and abandoned for 600 years. This coincidence is too big to dismiss. Fire from the sky? Yes. Burning sulfur? Yes. Dense smoke? Yes. Salt poisoning the soil? Yes. Survivors fleeing? Yes. So what do we have in our hands right now? A giant city, located exactly where Abraham could see it, melted by horrific heat, pickled in salt to death, and abandoned exactly like the curse in the ancient book. Critics can argue about semantics, about place names changing over millennia. Sure, names can change, but charred ruins underground don't lie. It still lies there, screaming the truth in our faces. But the final question, the most important question, remains open. We know what happened. We know where. We know when. But why, how? What the hell could create destruction power equivalent to 1,000 Hiroshima bombs in an era when the most advanced weapon was the bow and arrow? Was it a meteorite, or was it something more forbidden? Something that we modern humans only rediscovered in 1945? If you are still awake at this hour, then congratulations. You are exactly the type of audience I love. Those curious to the point of being reckless. We have the body, the destroyed city. We have the weapon, extreme heat. And we have the witnesses, the Bible and Sumerian texts. But now, we must face the most uncomfortable question. The question that divides the scientific community and makes conspiracy theorists moan with pleasure. What the hell actually happened? In 2021, the prestigious journal Nature published an earth-shattering paper. Researchers claimed a cosmic airburst, like the Tunguska event but stronger, wiped out tall el-Hammam. They ran computer models, a 50-meter meteor slamming into the atmosphere at 60,000 kilometers per hour, exploding 4 kilometers above the ground. The predicted result? Temperatures of 2,000 degrees Celsius, winds screaming at 1,000 kilometers per hour, pressure enough to crush bones. Everything matched the scene. Sounds like the case is closed, right? But wait, science is a bloody arena. In 2022, other geologists jumped in and screamed, "Dead wrong." They said the shocked quartz was due to misread data. They said the melted glass was just from defective pottery firing. And by 2025, Nature retracted the paper. So that's it? We're back to zero? No. Retracting the paper is just a matter of paperwork and methodology. It doesn't make the tons of melted pottery lying there disappear. It doesn't make the skeletons stop being fragmented. The destruction is real. The problem is only who or what pulled the trigger. Let's do a Sherlock Holmes-style elimination. Earthquake? The Jordan Valley sits on a major fault line. Earthquakes can collapse houses, but earthquakes don't melt pottery into glass. Earthquakes don't turn sand into crystal. Eliminated. Volcano. There are no active volcanoes nearby. No ash, no lava. Eliminated. Conventional warfare? Ancient armies could burn cities, but wood fires only reach about 600 to 800 degrees Celsius. To melt pottery and mud brick into green glass, you need temperatures above 1,500 degrees Celsius. Unless that army possessed napalm flamethrowers, this hypothesis also goes in the trash can. So what are we left with? Something that radiates insane heat in a split second. This is where things get uncomfortable. There is a hypothesis that most archaeologists plug their ears when hearing. Ancient nuclear war. Sounds crazy, right? Zecharia Sitchin and the Ancient Aliens Club have been rambling on about this. I'm not telling you to believe them, but look at this comparative data. Go to the Trinity site in New Mexico, where the U.S. tested the first atomic bomb in 1945. The sand there was melted into a layer of green glass called Trinitite. Now, look at the melted glass at Tall el-Hammam. Chemically and structurally, they are frighteningly similar. Both contain high-temperature minerals that ordinary kilns cannot create. In Hiroshima, shadows of victims were imprinted on walls, bones were fragmented, ceramics were melted on the surface while the inside remained intact because the heat speed was too fast. That is exactly what was found in the Jordan Valley. The Era epic speaks of weapons that make skin blister, hair fall out, eyes melt. Those are symptoms of radiation, not of being crushed by rocks, and not just here. Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan, Libyan desert glass. There are too many places in the world showing signs of extreme heat without a clear natural cause. I'm not saying aliens dropped nukes, even though the Sumerians actually talk about war gods. But there is an undeniable truth. A technology or natural phenomenon with destructive power equivalent to nuclear weapons occurred. Ultimately, whether it was a meteor or a weapon of the gods, the result was still a human tragedy. Sumerian scribes didn't have the word meteor. They didn't know about aerodynamics. They only saw fire from the sky, so they called it weapon of the gods. Biblical authors didn't know about shockwaves. They saw destruction, so they called it the wrath of God. They weren't writing science fiction. They were writing a trauma journal. They were trying to warn us. Civilization is very fragile. It can end in just the blink of an eye. Those cracked clay tablets and those melted pottery shards are witnesses that survived 4,000 years to tell us that story. The question is, are we humble enough to listen, or are we still arrogantly assuming we are safe in these glass skyscrapers? Remember Sodom, because history has a very bad habit. It likes to repeat itself. Look closely at this object, an inanimate piece of clay. But if you listen closely enough, it is screaming. I was here. I witnessed. I endured. That is the most primal desire of humanity, isn't it? We carve our names on stone steles, press our thumbs into wet clay, write status updates on social media, all because of one ultimate fear, the fear of being forgotten. Fear that when the final curtain falls, no one will know we ever existed. Tombstones say, "Remember us." And we, the curious souls of the next millennium, are actually doing that. But wait, that is just the tip of the iceberg. We are often obsessed with the moment of destruction, the explosion, the pillar of fire, the collapse. Boom, end of movie. But history doesn't stop when the smoke rises. Destruction, my friends, is only half the story, the loud and flashy half. The other half? It is quieter, more painful, and much crueler. It is the story of those left behind, survival, adaptation, and the way a civilization crawls out of the ashes to learn how to breathe again. In the final parts of today's video, I want you to join me in stepping into the void, the late Bronze Age gap in the Jordan Valley. Historians call it empty time. I call it the century-long nightmare. Imagine, right now, don't just listen to me, close your eyes and put yourself there. You are a merchant. Your skin is tanned, your feet calloused from miles of trading between the prosperous cities of the Jordan Valley. Your pockets are full of money, your donkey laden with goods. You are on your way home, back to your wife, to your toddler son just learning to walk. Life is good, right? Then suddenly, the sky behind you lights up. Not the light of dawn. It is brighter than the sun, tearing through the night. You turn around. A pillar of fire. No, a monster made of fire is swallowing the horizon. It rises right where your house stood firm yesterday. You run. You leave the goods, leave the donkey. You run like a madman towards that fire. But when you get there, nothing remains. Your city, gone. Your family, turned to ash. The streets you knew brick by brick, now a melted waste dump, smoking heavily. What will you do? Where will you go when your world, literally, has vaporized? The cold archaeological evidence doesn't lie. It shows us a brutal picture of the migration of these ghosts. The survivors, with eyes hollow from horror, dared not stay. They fled. They crossed the Jordan River heading west, plunging into the hills of Judea and Samaria. Population data during this period shows a sudden spike in those hill regions. That wasn't natural increase. That was a wave of refugees. New communities sprang up, built by those fleeing from the east, far away from that cursed valley. They built new houses. They farmed from scratch. But the heaviest luggage they carried was not property, but memory. Memory of incinerated cities, of the sky's fury, of the smell of sulfur and burning flesh. And this is where the irony of history begins to speak. Listen to me. Humans have a strange psychological defense mechanism. When the pain is too great, we don't retell it like a news report. We turn it into myth. We wrap naked pain in layers of religion, of moral lessons. Because only then can we swallow the truth. The names, Sodom and Gomorrah. Originally, they were place names, specific locations on a map. But through generations of oral tradition, through long nights by the refugee campfires, they transformed. They were no longer cities of brick and stone. They became symbols. Symbols of sin, symbols of judgment. More than 1,000 years later, when the book of Genesis was written, perhaps during the Jewish exile in Babylon around 586 BC, the disaster at Tal el-Hammam, the alleged Sodom, had passed for a millennium. 1,000 years. Enough time for truth to turn into legend, and legend to turn into theology. The story was painted over. It was embellished with theological meanings to deter humans. Obey if you don't want to end up like them. But my friends, look through that fog of religion. Look at the remaining bones of the story. Geographic location, match. Method of destruction, fire from the sky, match. Salt and barrenness, match. And most importantly, the names. This process of mythologization is incredibly important. Don't be quick to smirk and assume the Bible or ancient legends are fabrications of superstitious people. No, mythologization doesn't mean the event is false. It means the event did happen, and it was so terrible that humans had to find a way to assign a meaning to it to avoid going insane. They needed a reason. Why did we die? Why did we lose everything? Ah, it was the gods. Because we did something wrong. Historical truth was sacrificed for moral instruction, but the core of the truth, the horror of that day, still lies dormant under layers of flowery words, waiting for us, the detectives of the new age, to come and peel it back. But the question is, how? How can a memory survive over 1,000 years without Facebook, without newspapers, without hard drives? How could those miserable refugees pass on a message so accurate it haunts their descendants for dozens of centuries? We just talked about the Bible, about Sodom and Gomorrah, where the story is wrapped in a thick moral shell. But what if you want something gorier, more realistic, less dogmatic, but equally creepy? Look to their neighbor, Mesopotamia. These guys don't joke around. They have things called lament texts. Sounds fun just hearing the name, right? Unlike the Bible, these texts look more like crime scene reports. Of course, they still blame the gods. In the Mesopotamian mind, disaster isn't born naturally. It is the result of a heavenly board meeting. The gods sit down, drink tea, gossip, and then stamp the red seal, destroy. Reason? Maybe humans were bad, or simply due to politics between the gods. Who knows what the gods think? But here is the interesting part. Cast the gods aside. Hidden deep under that religious cover are technical details so hard they give you goosebumps. Temperature, wind direction, time of day, environmental impact. These details aren't things you can make up while sitting in an air-conditioned room. They are the memories of witnesses. Things eyes saw, ears heard, flesh felt. Although not perfect, they have survived through centuries like stubborn cockroaches. You might be frowning. Hey Zorro, how can we trust oral stories? Playing the telephone game for 5 minutes already gets it wrong, let alone thousands of years. I understand your skepticism. We, arrogant modern humans, believe in digital archives, in clear dates and years. We think ancient people were backward because they didn't have Wikipedia. Huge mistake. Oral cultures don't operate the way we gossip. They embed history into myth, into poetry. Why? Because poetry has rhyme, has rhythm. It is easier to remember than a dry Excel report. It gets into the brain and stays there. And its accuracy? Frighteningly high. Let me take you on a quick trip to Australia. Aboriginals in Australia have oral stories describing sea levels rising and submerging coastal areas. Modern geologists went to check and bingo. Those events actually happened at the end of the last ice age. Do you know how long ago that was? Over 10,000 years ago. If Australian Aboriginals can keep a memory file intact for 10,000 years just by word of mouth, then preserving the memory of Sodom for 3,000 or 4,000 years by Mesopotamians or Hebrews is trivial. The mechanism is the same. Turn memory into story, turn story into ritual, and teach it to descendants like a lifeline. But the Sumerians in Mesopotamia had a secret weapon that Australian Aboriginals didn't. They knew how to write. By 2000 BC, their scribal schools were operating at full capacity like printing factories. And do you know what the students' homework was? Not solving for X. It was copying the Laments. Imagine you are a child, and your homework is to copy over and over hundreds of times about your city being burned down, about dead bodies lying everywhere. A cruel educational method? Maybe. But effective? Absolutely. This repetitive copying, generation after generation, created an eternal backup. Of course, there were typos, there were variations, but the core, that bone-deep pain, could not be lost. The clay tablets we find today, mostly from around 1900 to 1600 BC, are copies of older texts. The time gap between the event and the text is very small. It's like us writing about World War II today. It is still within living memory. Those lines are not cliché templates. The mother turns her face away, daring not to look at her daughter. The father turns his back on his son. The city turns into mounds of rubble. That isn't abstract theology. That is human reaction to unbearable loss. When destruction is so terrible, you dare not look at your loved ones, because you know you cannot save them. That horror was encoded into clay, transcending time, so that today we can touch their pain. But if Mesopotamia gives us emotion and meteorology, the Bible gives us something else. Political context. In Genesis 14, there is a war. The War of Kings. And this is where things start getting interestingly messy. Can we use it to set a date for this doomsday? If in the previous part we were meteorologists measuring firestorms, now put on your police badge. We are going to investigate a cold case. Open Genesis chapter 14, the War of Kings. Usually when reading the Bible, what do you expect? Miracles, sermons, talking burning bushes. But this chapter, it's different. It's dry. It's cold. It reads exactly like a military intelligence report. 4 kings from Mesopotamia invade the Jordan Valley. 5 cities in the plain rebel against them. Abraham, whom we usually picture as a gentle old shepherd, appears here as a warlord, leading troops to rescue his nephew Lot. It lists names of kings, names of cities, political alliances, military campaigns. Modern scholars have argued until their heads exploded about whether this chapter is fiction or history, but its level of detail is astonishing. You don't make up such specific political details unless you are basing it on an old intelligence source. The author of Genesis, though writing much later, certainly held in their hands documents, or oral stories, preserving exactly the political chessboard of the Bronze Age. And this is where things get tangled, a real mess. If this war is real, and the destruction of Sodom happened right after, can we pin attack on the timeline? Most biblical scholars place this event around 2000 to 1900 BC. But archaeological evidence at el-Hammam, the place we suspect is Sodom, shows the city was cooked around 1650 BC, a difference of about 250 to 300 years. A gap wide enough for you to scream, "Zorro, are you tricking me? These 2 events are unrelated." Calm down. Don't let numbers fool you. Bronze Age chronology is notoriously a nightmare. Biblical genealogies aren't calendars, and radiocarbon C14 has margins of error up to a century. But more important than dates, look at the core of the story. Imagine there is a catastrophic car crash. Witness A, Mesopotamian, says, "The traffic gods met and decided the car must crash into the pole for cosmic order." Witness B, Hebrew, says, "No, the driver drove recklessly, broke the law, and was punished by the supreme sheriff." 2 different stories about the reason, theology, 2 different recording times. But both agree on a naked truth. The car was totaled, fire erupted, and no one survived. el-Hammam was destroyed suddenly, lasting environmental damage, salinized soil. Residents vanished. That is an undeniable physical fact, serving as the foundation for both traditions. The Sumerians, with polytheistic thinking, saw destruction as an administrative decision of a bureaucratic divine council. The Hebrews, with monotheistic thinking, saw it as a moral judgment of a single god. Same disaster, 2 cultural lenses. But this story didn't just survive that explosion, it also had to survive a second doomsday. Around 1200 BC, the Bronze Age collapse. If you think the world today is chaotic, 1200 BC was hell on earth. The sea peoples invaded like tsunamis, trade networks shattered, cities collapsed in a chain reaction from Greece to Egypt. Writing was forgotten, literacy rates dropped to near zero. A dark age covered humanity. Terrifying silence. How did the memory of Sodom, of el-Hammam, not get wiped out in this cultural deluge? The answer lies in the intense vitality of oral tradition, stories hidden in songs, whispered through generations of refugees, crossing the chaos of history. Until the light of civilization returned, when writing was restored, those memories were collected by Jewish scribes, who were living in exile in Babylon. They compiled the Pentateuch around 450 BC. From the original event, 1650 BC, to the completed text, 450 BC. Over 1,000 years, a long journey. It's like the Iliad and Odyssey being retold by Homer in 750 BC, but describing events from 1200 BC. A gap of a few hundred years, even a millennium, is not a barrier for traumatic memories. For the inhabitants of the Jordan Valley, that destruction was the end. Before, prosperous, crowded. After, wasteland, cursed. In the period from 1650 to 1200 BC, the Jordan Valley was abandoned. No one dared go there. Salinized land could not be farmed. And psychologically, who dares to build a house on a mass grave of thousands of burnt dead? But humans are stubborn creatures. Eventually, in the Iron Age, they returned. They built new houses right on top of the old ashes. They found melted pottery shards. They saw layers of salt. And they told each other why this place was like this. The ruins of el-Hammam, looming over the plain, became a permanent warning, a beacon of fear and awe. That is why this story matters. Not because it proves which religion is right or wrong, but because it shows how humanity processes its wounds. We have gone through fire, through the fall of empires, through the voids of history, and now we stand at the end of the journey. The meaning of all this for you, right now. Look behind me, a modern city, concrete, reinforced steel, tempered glass. Looks eternal, doesn't it? Much more solid than those mud brick houses in the Jordan Valley 3,600 years ago. But don't be complacent. The ancient Mesopotamians were smarter than we think. They understood a cruel truth we often try to ignore: fragility. Their architecture, literature, religion were all built on the fear of impermanence. They built houses with mud brick, not just because of a lack of stone, but because they knew sooner or later it would collapse. And when it collapsed, they could rebuild. But they wrote on baked clay. Why? Because when the city burns, mud brick crumbles, but clay tablets baked in fire become even harder. They wrote to survive the fire. The Sumerian scribes, the drafters of the lament texts, they were like executors of the last will and testament for an entire civilization. They knew their world was ending. The Dynasty collapsed. Elamites invaded. Fire everywhere. They didn't flee in silence. They screamed into the face of time, "Record it! Record this pain, so no one is allowed to forget." And they won. Those laments were copied hundreds of years after Sumer had vanished from the map. Biblical authors during the exile in Babylon did exactly the same. They gathered historical fragments, stories of Sodom and Gomorrah, to ensure that their people's disaster was not buried in dust. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and later even Jesus all used the name Sodom as an ultimate warning. Why? Because that image was too powerful. Wealthy, powerful cities turning to ash in an instant. No escape, no exception. The destruction of Sodom, whether you believe it was due to a meteor airburst, or the wrath of God, or secret alien weapons, the final result remains unchanged. It is proof of two things: human fragility and the extraordinary resilience of memory. Fragility, because everything we build, including these skyscrapers behind me, will eventually return to dust. Resilience, because stories survive. Tall el-Hammam isn't just a pile of rubble for archaeologists to dig up. It is a bridge of blood and bone connecting past and present. Melted pottery and shocked quartz are forensic data. But the Bible and ancient texts are the cry of humans. We, the people of the 21st century, are actually no different from Bronze Age scribes. We are also afraid. We fear nuclear war, fear climate change, fear some random meteor visiting Earth. And what do? We write, we film, we upload to the cloud, the modern version of clay tablets. We hope that someone, at some point in the future, will read our data and understand that we were here, we lived, we loved and suffered. So tonight, when you turn off this screen and crawl into your warm blanket, remember them, the nameless citizens of Sodom and Gomorrah. Thousands vaporized in a terrifying split second 36 centuries ago. They didn't have a chance to rewrite their story, but through charred ruins, through deterrent biblical verses, and through your very curiosity today, they are still alive. They remind us that life is a fragile gift. That memory is the most precious thing we can leave behind. In a sense, we are all survivors telling stories by the fire. The continuum continues, from Sumerians to Hebrews, and now to you. Good night, fellow traveler in the flow of history. Sleep deep, and never forget, the past never truly passes. Ancient voices are still whispering in the wind, only if you are willing to listen. Dream beautiful dreams before the dawn comes again.